Today on Upfront, jobs, business, and the economy. The outlook for 2019. What can businesses expect in the year ahead? Will potential turmoil in Washington affect the economy? And what does labor hope for from a new governor?
Covering the issues important to Wisconsin. This is Upfront with Mike Goucher.
Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Upfront. We begin our final program of 2018 by looking ahead to 2019 and focusing on what a change in Madison will mean for the Wisconsin economy, both businesses and workers. Governor-elect Tony Evers will take over January 7th, and he'll have a Republican-controlled legislature to work with. Our state has seen a strong labor market and low unemployment in 2018. But the president's tariffs are being felt here, and some businesses, including dairy farmers, are hurting. So what can we expect in 2019? Let's start things off by talking with two Wisconsin business leaders. Corey Nettles is the managing director of Generation Growth Capital and a former state commerce secretary. And Austin Ramirez is the CEO of Husco International in Waukesha. Thanks to both of you for being with us today.
Thank you.
And I thought I'd begin by asking each of you for a piece of advice that you could give to the governor-elect. Because of the change in Madison, a lot of people wondering what that will look like, what it will feel like to business. Austin Ramirez, I'll begin with you. What would be your advice to the incoming governor?
Yeah, sure. I think my advice would be to focus on the issues that both sides can agree on. Approach this not from an ideological perspective, but try to be pragmatic and find things that both sides agree we need to do. And I think there's plenty of scope of work that needs to be done in Wisconsin that everybody can agree on, rather than fighting about the things that we're never going to get on the same page.
Give me an example or two of what you're talking about.
Manufacturing is one of those areas where I think everybody agrees that building the manufacturing community in Wisconsin is a really important thing to do. And so let's find those policy tools that both the Democrats and Republicans can agree on and get those in place and focus on areas of agreement rather than areas where we can disagree and fight.
Corey Nettles, you're a former state commerce secretary. What would be your advice to Governor-elect Evers?
Don't screw it up. From my perspective, the Wisconsin economy is doing well. It's humming along reasonably well. We have a lot of momentum across the state in this economy. The fact that we're at effectively no unemployment, I think, is a sign of the strength of that economy, and just not to screw that up. All the things that he cares about on education policy and other, I'll call it social policies, a strong, healthy economy with high corporate taxes being paid, for example, creates additional resources for him to invest in education and invest in some of the social safety net things that he cares about. So number one, I'd say is just don't screw it up.
So what's the temptation he should avoid as governor?
You know, there was a lot of noise on the Democratic primary about Foxconn, for example, and Governor-elect Evers was among the most temperate in his comments about the Foxconn incentive package. I'd say put a bear hug around our friends at Foxconn and tell them that you're going to continue to support the contract, the deal that was struck, and make sure that that moves along. If there's some things at the margin that he thinks he can do incrementally to improve upon that, I'd say fine. But really to kind of find those things in the economy that are going well and do everything you can to stay out of the way, help where you can, but not to screw it up.
Do you agree with that?
I do.
You do?
Yeah, I think one thing we got to remember is that Foxconn's not too deep into this investment here in Wisconsin, so we don't have a lot of leverage over them in terms of them being really committed deeply to Wisconsin. So I think that's something we really don't
you are in a manufacturing firm, an engineering firm, and you mentioned that you're optimistic that the governor-elect will get the importance of manufacturing. That was a priority of Governor Walker. Why are you confident that this governor will have that same approach? Or
I'd say I'm more hopeful than confident.
Okay.
But manufacturing is one of those sectors that everybody knows is important to the Wisconsin economy, and I think it's in the interest of both Democrats and Republicans to protect that sector and have policies in place that encourage it to continue growing.
One of the things that the Governor-elect Evers has talked about on this program is the importance of the startup community. And that's something you hear different takes on that. You hear about progress being made in our startup community, but you also hear folks say we could be doing a lot more. Can we be doing more, and what would that look like for a new governor?
Yeah, I mean, everyone talks about smokestack chasing and the big company that locates into your community from somewhere else. That's what gets all the glitz. But the reality is the economy is driven by the startup and the growth of existing firms, great firms like Husco, for example. So I would really encourage him, do what you have to do in terms of attraction and recruitment, but really focus on startup and growth, because that's what really drives the economy. On the startup side, we've had a great run over the last 5 to 10 years, lots of good activity happening across the state. The ecosystem is starting to grow and mature. I would continue, I always come back to culture and creating a culture of entrepreneurship, telling people, encouraging people to take responsible risk, not penalizing people for, quote, failure and saying that's okay, let's try again. So I think there's some things he can do. We have some great work being done in Southeast Wisconsin and Madison in particular. So he should find ways of supporting that.
Can we do more, Austin Ramirez, on the startup front?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've got some good incentive policies in place today for investors to put money behind Wisconsin-based startups, but there's always more we can do. One example that comes to mind is the State of Wisconsin Investment Board has an awfully large pool of funds available to them, and I think allocating a portion of that to investments in Wisconsin companies that are in the startup space would be one really good policy that can help foster this ecosystem that's already starting to gain some traction across the state.
I do want to ask both of you about something that sounds like a philosophical change between the outgoing governor and the incoming governor, and that is the use of incentives to attract businesses or to retain businesses in this state. Governor-elect Evers sounds like he's more skeptical about that as an economic development tool. Should he be skeptical? Is that something that we should be doing, Austin Ramirez, just to compete with other states around the country?
Well, I tell you what, philosophically, I think this notion of states competing with special incentives is terrible. It's waste for the U.S. economy. And if I were king, that's one of the things I'd get rid of. But the reality is, this is the world we live in today. And as a manufacturer that, as I look to start up a new plant, it is my fiduciary responsibility to explore all the incentives and every factor that goes into where I put a new manufacturing plant. So if Wisconsin chooses not to participate in the game of having the right incentives for companies to either relocate or stay in Wisconsin, I think we lose, and I think it hurts Wisconsin taxpayers, it hurts the Wisconsin business community, and as much as it may be distasteful, it's just a part of the business environment in the U.S. today.
Is it just something that we have to live with because that's the way business is done in America today?
Yeah, regrettably, and I agree with Austin. I mean, I'm the former Commerce Secretary, so I wrote those incentive packages that encourage companies to come here from Illinois or Minnesota or wherever. And my mantra used to always be, if I were king, I'd change it, but I don't believe in unilateral disarmament.
Yeah.
If we step out of the game, the other states will be happy to take up that space. And at the margin, these incentive packages do make a difference. I mean, we've got great workers who are some of the most productive in the world. That's terrific. You have very strong energy infrastructure that can support manufacturing business in particular. That's terrific. So there's a lot of things that are going to be numbers 1, 2, and 3, and 4 on the list of a site selection decider, the president CEO of a company. But the incentives are also going to matter too. As Austin said, they have an obligation to maximize shareholder value and return. And if state X is offering tremendous incentives and state Y says 0, then it tips it against us. So I'd say you got to participate at a reasonable level until the rules of that game change.
We're going to take a break. We'll continue our conversation with Corey Nettles and Austin Ramirez in just a moment. When we come back, we'll talk a little bit about how the national economy could affect Wisconsin and also the future of the jobs agency in Wisconsin, WEDC. We'll be back in just a moment.
Up Front with Mike Goucher, brought to you by American Transmission Company.